Staying on the topic of e-commerce, I have a really cool talk up next titled Enriching Commerce Data in Headless Architecture. This talk is presented by Roy Derks from Saleor. Roy, the floor actually mean our screens are yours. Take it away.
Great to be here today at Strapi Conf. I hope everyone enjoyed so far. So my talk today is going to be about enriching headless commerce architectures. So what is this talk going to be about? So for the coming, I think around 30 minutes, I'm going to be telling you about how you can use Strapi together with other services. And in order to understand what kind of services those are, let's have a look. So you might be an opportunity where you already have a CMS and hopefully built with Strapi, but you also want an e-commerce store. And you maybe see many bloggers doing this. So they start out with blogging, they have a cool CMS for this, they create lots of content, but at some point they want to monetize this. And the best way to monetize this is probably by also adding some e-commerce to it. So this could be you. But what could also be you is that you're at a point that you already have an e-commerce store, but you want to enrich the data with other data. And I think you can see this already by customers because they usually, if you're an e-commerce, then you know customers want more and more information about products. They want to have an experience. They want to see what else is possible. They want to have all sorts of data that regularly an e-commerce platform can't give you. But luckily, you can have both. And I'll be telling you how to do this later on. But to give you a small glimpse of what might happen, we're going to be using GraphQL for this. And why GraphQL? That's something I will tell you later. But first, let's head over to learn a bit more about me. Because if you're going to be listening to me for the next time, then you especially need to know who I am. So as already said, my name is Roy. I live in Amsterdam, and you can find me on Twitter using the handle @GetHackTeam. So currently, I work for a company called Vanderbron, and what they're doing is selling renewable energy across the Netherlands. And over there, we use lots of cool technologies such as React, TypeScript, but also GraphQL. And one of the reasons I'm an ambassador to Saleor is because I really love GraphQL. But besides that, I've been in e-commerce almost my entire life. Starting out when I was around 14, I started my first e-commerce store built with OpenCart, which is a nice platform, also open source, using PHP, HTML, jQuery, like all the things that used to be really cool. But today, people are asking more, and I think that's why Saleor, might be a good choice for you as well if you're looking to get into the e-commerce world. If you want to learn a bit more about me, make sure to also find me on YouTube. If you would, search for my name, you can find all sorts of talks, mostly about technologies like React, TypeScript, and also GraphQL, which you can also see by looking at the books that are written. And in these books, I've built all sorts of sample projects, and I believe some of them also use Strapi. So if you're starting to learn Strapi, make sure to also get these books. And if not, let's learn more about how to use Strapi with other tools. And to look at those other tools, I'm going to be telling you more about Saleor. So what actually is Saleor? I already gave away that Saleor is open source and it's also headless, just as Strapi is. So Saleor is an open source API first or headless e-commerce store. And with Saleor, you can build e-commerce stores yourself. So you already see lots of companies doing this. So companies, agencies, and also people working in the open source field. So far, they've really been adopting Saleor. I believe it's the biggest GitHub repository or the biggest start GitHub repository in the e-commerce sector. So I think that's especially showing how big Saleor is nowadays. And of course, because it's open source, it's really easy to extend, to build new tools on it. And to tell you a bit more, it's also headless and it's using a modern stack. So for those who want to know, on the back end, it's using Python, and they've got all sorts of e-commerce starter stores for the front end built with React.js and Next.js. And of course, it's using GraphQL. So GraphQL is especially a big plus for me. And with it being API first, GraphQL is a nice addition. And I already told you it's headless, and it's going to be really important for the rest of this talk. So it is headless, and it's using GraphQL. So these two things are especially important to understand before doing this talk, because by using these technologies, being headless but also using GraphQL, mean it can easily be extended or combined with other architectures. And Strapi is one of those examples. So if we're looking at this slide, you can see we can use Saleor together with Strapi based on GraphQL. And as you might know, GraphQL doesn't come built in with Strapi, but it's easily being installed just by running one simple command. And with that, you can just use GraphQL all over your Strapi APIs. And Saleor is API first and also based on GraphQL, so we don't need to install anything extra for that one. But how are we going to be combining those two things? We know they're both using GraphQL, or they could use GraphQL, but how can you actually combine several tools or services using GraphQL? And the answer to that is schema stitching. And schema stitching is not the only answer to this, because you might have heard for something called Apollo federations. But I'll be asking, not really asking, but I'm going to be showing you more about Apollo federations later on. But for now, we're going to be focusing on schema stitching. And schema stitching was actually one of the first ways to combine GraphQL schemas together, and then Apollo came up with federations and he actually ditched the project. But luckily, there was a company called the Guild, and they brought it back to life, and actually they brought back to life the entire GraphQL tools project, which they're now maintaining, and which is also all open source. And here is also the ability to stitch multiple GraphQL schemas together using schema stitching. So schema stitching will let you do this. So at the top you can see we have a query in Saleor, which is used to get products information like a title and a price. And then we have a query defined in Strapi. So if you install GraphQL and add it to Strapi, you can send queries to it. And queries can be used to get content type collections such as post maybe, or maybe products, or whatever you like to call them. And you can query them after installing GraphQL. And with schema stitching, we can combine two queries, or not really combine the two queries, but combine the two schemas to be able to send queries like you can see on the right. So we can actually send a query that gets information about both Saleor and also from Strapi. And we're going to be doing this later on using React and Next.js, and of course also GraphQL. So how does this work? So you can see at the top, we have a query for Saleor, which is getting products information. And then we have a query for Strapi, which is getting information about post, or more detailed information like a description. So using schema stitching, we can send a query that combines the two and actually gets the data for both sources. And by combining these schemas, we're sort of stitching them together because we can define what fields should be merged, what fields shouldn't be merged, and how the data will look like. So you can actually even transform or normalize the data. And this is something that you can do using schema stitching. So there are several advantages to doing schema stitching opposed to Apollo federation, which I'll tell you later on. And maybe what you could also do is just sending queries to both sources. So sending a query to Strapi, sending a query to Saleor, combine the results and displaying that to your users. But there are several advantages of using schema stitching. And I think the biggest advantage is using one unified schema. So if you have users for your API, maybe third party that are using your API, or maybe customers that are using your API directly, you can deliver them one unified schema. And for them, it's a really nice way to introspect what's going on in your data, what are the possibilities, and what do you want to be able to show to your users. And what's also nice to see is that there are merged types. So all the types from content in Strapi will be merged with types from content in Saleor. And this is a really cool feature because if you're using something like GraphQL Code Generator on the front end, which by the way is maintained by the same company that maintains schema stitching, then it's also a really nice example because maybe you're already using React, just I'm going to be showing you later on the demo. And with GraphQL Code Generator, you can use your GraphQL schema to create TypeScript types if you also use TypeScript together with GraphQL and React. So having these merged types and having one unified schema is really helping you to auto-generate code using the GraphQL API. And of course, also data normalization. So if you're bringing back together data from two different schemas, you probably also want to normalize the data a bit in order to be, in order to have data that is unified but also normalized, so you don't have to clean up all these things in your front end. So these are three advantages, but there are way more advantages, of course. So make sure to really check out the documentation and see what else is there to offer by schema stitching and especially GraphQL tools. And what's also nice to tell you is we can do all this from sort of the client. So we're going to be using GraphQL tools which is an open source library maintained by the guild, and also Next.js, which is also open source. And using these two technologies, we're going to be sort of doing things client-side. So you don't really building an API, although we are going to be using Next.js API routes. But that's something to worry about later. And so let me try and let's look at some code. And for this, I've created this GitHub repository that you can find on this page. I'm going to be sharing a QR code with you later on, which you can easily scan with your phone, or just go to this URL if you're behind a computer right now. So yeah, let's look at some code. So like I told you, I just created a simple Next.js application that's has some basic data in there, and it's using this basic index.js. It's really gonna display the starter Next.js project. So this would be or up at this page. Let me see if it's running. No, so I probably just need to start it run using the yarn dev command. But this will start my Next.js project. So let me go to the browser and probably we see something happening here. Be reloaded just to be sure. Yeah, so it's just a sample Next.js product that's just helping you to get started. And in here, as I told you, we're going to be doing things from the client. So what I've done, I'm going to be using API routes. And API routes in Next.js are a nice way to build APIs without having to set up a framework to build APIs. And Next.js is helping you by using these API routes in a way to normalize data, but also to bring backends closer to what you're doing on the front end. So even if you're a front end developer, or maybe your company is calling you a front end developer, you can still do full stack just by using API routes in Next.js. And in here, I've also created lots of code already. So let me try and close this a bit. So this is not important right now to understand. So what's important to see right now is that we're using Apollo Server. I'm using Apollo Server for microservices. So this is sort of the smaller package to get Apollo Server and also to create schemas. And if you look here, we can see whatever we return to Next.js is the Apollo server running on API/GraphQL. And this is something that we can see if we would go here. So don't mind looking at the queries just yet, because it's something we're going to be looking at later. But what I want to do, as I told you, I'm going to be bringing together the GraphQL API from Strapi with Saleor. So the GraphQL API with Strapi, that's something I've set up just by running Strapi locally. And whatever I did there was creating a new product collection, or a content collection actually, called products. I added some information like ID, title. I think I put in description there as well. So this is a very long text. It actually isn't, but it doesn't really matter because we're looking at the demo right now. So I've created this one, and also I'm going to be using the Saleor demo, which is actually the demo environment for Saleor. I could have just set up a separate one, but I think we just as easily to just do it like this. And if you look at Saleor, we can see we enlarge this a bit. So we also have a query to get products information that has an ID and a name and description. And also we have the same thing in Strapi. So in Strapi, we also have a query to get products information. And you already see they look a bit different. So Saleor is using the edges and node concept, or the connection concept that is very suitable for Relay, while Strapi actually has a way more flat GraphQL API structure. So using GraphQL and schema stitching, we're going to be combining the two on the Next.js project. And as you see, I already created something, and what's important to see here that I've added a field called Saleor ID to Strapi. So whenever I created my content collection in Strapi, I added a Saleor ID field to it. And this field, it correlates with what we're going to be seeing over here. So my apple juice, not really my banana juice, but with Strapi we can actually really easily add this one. So if we go to localhost, somewhere 3.1, see where it is, it's 1337. And it's the admin, of course. So over here, I already created. I'm just going to be logging anyway. This is just my password protector trying to protect us. So over here, you can see I already add a product. I can add new products, and I believe the Saleor ID is something I can put in here. We can also do banana juice. So just like that, we saved some banana juice, and in our API we can see should already get in here. Maybe we should publish it, except saving it. Yeah. So you can see in our Strapi CMS, which is running locally, we have some products information that we want to be using together with the information we have in Saleor. So in Saleor we have this products information, and as you just saw, I'm using the ID from Saleor inside Strapi in a new field called Saleor ID. So I think this is a really nice way to combine the two data structures. Something else you could do is maybe use slug for it. So that's something you could do, like having a slug in both and combining it on the one. But just using the Saleor ID, which I think is the most fault proof. And then you can see we also have our API route, of course, exposed to an XAS. So let me see how that is set up. So in here you can see I'm using GraphQL tools and Stitch, but also Delegate. But first let's look at the Stitch part and also wrap. Let me clean this up a bit by putting it here. It's very nice. Okay, so what I did over here was creating 3 schemas actually. So one is my local schema, which is used to have card information. So later on I want to be adding products to a card. I think it's a bit out of scope for what we'll be showing you today. So let's forget about the local schema. But some other schemas I created was a product schema, which is actually my Saleor demo environment, which I already showed you. So this is having my products from Saleor. And also I've added a schema for my CMS. So this is my Strapi CMS. And over here you can see I'm having my local host, port 1337, where Strapi is running now. And as we just saw, we already added some products to that one. And in here you can see I'm also transforming a bit of the schema that I already have. So all the root fields, which are my queries, mutations, subscriptions, if I have any, they are going to be preceded by Strapi underscore. So by doing like this, I know that all my main queries or main root fields are from Saleor, and the one with the Strapi that are preceded by Strapi underscore, those are from Strapi. I'm doing the same one with types. And this is something that you can see in my docs over here. So if we would look here, we can actually already find if we search for Strapi. You can see all the types that are coming from the Strapi GraphQL API, they've been preceded by Strapi underscore. And also my queries and mutations, they are also being preceded by Strapi underscore. So with this, I already have a nice separation of concerns, while I'm still being able to actually combine the two things. So you can see the queries that we did here. So this is a query we can still do here in the combined API. So this is the combined API. We could, an example, have this one for the Saleor products. Also want to put a name here. So this is getting my data from Saleor. And then within the same query, we could also just add products from Strapi. Just do Strapi underscore products. So let's wait for a bit to load. Yeah, so here you can see we have the products information coming from Saleor. So this is Saleor data. This is Strapi data, which of course is obvious because, yeah, the query is being preceded by Strapi underscore. As you can see over here, so here's the data from Strapi coming. So we actually want to combine the two things into one GraphQL query, because the schemas, they are now within the same schema, but they're not really stitched together. They're now just two separate schemas being merged together, or not really merged, being actually existing alongside, because everything that comes from Strapi is being preceded by Strapi underscore. And something we're doing here is actually stitching the schema together. So what I've done, I have the 3 sub-schemas, which are my local schema consisting of my card, which is something that usually lives on the client with Saleor because there isn't a dedicated card query. So that's something you can create on the client, and I decided to create this within an API route actually. So that could be a nice way to, in your application, actually have a card endpoint without having one being supplied by Saleor. But also I have a subschema for products, which is my products information coming directly from Saleor, and also my CMS, which is my locally running Strapi CMS. So by stitching the tree together, you can see I'm also extending my type definition. So this is extending my schema, and I'm extending the type product, and I'm actually adding a new field to it called CMS metadata, which is actually Strapi products. So this is the products type coming from Strapi. So Strapi has a products type, which we saw in the playground, which is actually this one. So we're doing a query for products. You can see it has a products type. It has all these fields. And whenever we add a new field in the Strapi admin, so if we would add a new field here, maybe description short, description, maybe we want to add something like an introduction, maybe we want to add images, maybe we want to add whatever you can imagine. Whatever we add over here will be added to the type products for Strapi, and whenever we use schema stitching, it will become available over here. So if we would add something like images, maybe we can even add categories. There's all sorts of things you could add right over here. Maybe you want to add promotional stuff. Everything gets over here, and you can see because it has the Strapi product types, which you can see right here. But as we said, we want to stitch the data together. So we want to be able to have a query that is combining data from both Saleor with Strapi together. So we actually want to combine these two queries into one. So you want to do something like, let me copy paste this. So what we want to do actually is something like this. Modify this. So we're getting an error because of course it isn't linked together like this, but what we want to do, we want to get products information from Saleor and we want to enrich it with Strapi. So the Strapi information should become available under a different field. And that's just what I did in the code here by extending the product type in our schema with CMS data. CMS data is the type of Strapi products. And you can see it is a list or an array. This is something nice to clean up later on, but it's based on the way that you can get information from Strapi. So if you want to query Strapi and you want to get a specific product in this example or specific content type, and you want to have something else, then the ID is a filter. You can only getting it by using a list. But that's something to worry about later. So to get the information for this extended type product and this field CMS data, we added a local resolver. It's not really a local resolver, but it's a resolver within my stitch schema. And in here you can see I'm having the product. So product type, which you can see over here. I'm also getting information for the CMS data field, which you can see here. The selection set is ID, so I'm getting the ID from my product, which is actually my parent. So the product type, not the Strapi product type, but the product type from Saleor, will be the parent object. And the parent object has the ID, of course. So using the ID, we can just query Strapi using the query we see just right here. And to this we actually add the Saleor ID, which is the product ID coming from Saleor. And something else is going on over here in my browser. So let me get back to the running GraphQL query. And actually my combined query can be found here. So what I'm doing over here, I'm querying multiple things. So I'm querying my card, which is my local schema. It doesn't really matter because we're not using it for today's content. But what we are using is the product query from Saleor, which we'll use to get information about this ID. And over here you can see we're also getting the CMS metadata, which is getting information from Strapi. So we could add more stuff here, like description, and then load it again. And actually what's being done under the hood is what you can see over here. So under the hood, it's sending it's doing a query with Strapi products where Saleor ID is this one. So in our code, you can see whenever we're getting the extended type CMS metadata for product, you can see it's being resolver by delegating the scheme from CMS subschema, which is Strapi. It's doing a query. It's doing a query for Strapi products, the same as here. It's passing some arguments like where and also Saleor ID matches product ID. So product ID is coming from the parent object, which is of course the type from Saleor. And you can see the same thing over here. So this is the parent. Our ID is over here. Using schema stitching, we're being passed to get data for CMS metadata, which is actually this query. So by doing it like this, we can actually combine Saleor together with Strapi. And I think this is a really nice way for you to enrich your e-commerce store with data from Strapi. But of course, the other way around would also work, because you could stitch the schema from Saleor right into your Strapi CMS data if you're using GraphQL. And as I told you, the full code will be available after this talk. Finding this GitHub repository. So if you find for my name and then go to Saleor Strapi Stitching, you can find all the code we just saw and even some more code, because this is just the tip of the iceberg, if I might say. So what do you think? Do you think this is like a nice example for you to try out? And this is something, I also like to hear from you on Twitter. As I told you, my handle is @GetHackTeam. On here you can, send me any question you like. Also about Saleor, but GraphQL, whatever you feel free for. And to also top this off, and I think this will be a popular question, is, so what about Apollo Federation? I already told you that schema stitching was sort of the preceder of Apollo Federations, because Apollo used to maintain the GraphQL Tools library, and schema stitching was part of the GraphQL Tools library. That's no longer the case, and actually Apollo is using Federations as the preferred way of merging or stitching multiple schemas together. And I think Federation is very nice, but it's especially nice if you have an active microservice architecture, and if you're working with multiple teams that are maintaining multiple microservices. Every microservice has its own schema, and with Federation, it's very nice to merge those together. But I think for simpler use cases, or maybe simpler is an understatement, but at least for use cases where you don't really have microservices, you just have two separate services that you want to stitch together, I think schema stitching from GraphQL Tools is a really nice way to get the most out of this. And of course, you could also use Apollo Federation for this. As you saw, we're already using Apollo as a GraphQL server in this example. But I think it's also about what you want to accomplish. So if you want to work together with multiple large groups, use federations. If you want to stitch together two small services quite easily, and small, I said, is maybe an understatement, because it depends on your code base, like how big your Strapi or Saleor setup is. But at least schema stitching is a nice, approachable way to really merge those two schemas together, and actually quite powerful, as we saw in the code. And as promised, you can also get the code by scanning this QR code. So by scanning this QR code, you can get all the information that we saw in this demo. You can also play around with it yourself. So maybe try and use the Saleor demo that's already being linked. Maybe set up a Strapi of your own. Maybe use your own Strapi setup, and actually try and merge those together. And like I told you, this code is being used in a way that Saleor is the main port of information, and Strapi is being used to enrich the data. In this talk, I showed you some examples of how you can also do this the other way around. So you can actually take Strapi as your starting point, and then merge Saleor data into your Strapi setup. And this could easily be working if you've already been working with Strapi. But if you want to know more about headless e-commerce architectures, make sure to go to the Saleor website, so that's saleor.io, and also get the code to start playing around with it. And if any questions, find me on Twitter. And if not, then hopefully I'll see you around at some other conference. And I would like to give it back to the next speaker. So thank you for listening, and hopefully we ever meet again. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, Roy. I always look at talks like this and I'm like, whoa, that is so fancy. But like, real talk, it's really good to see Strapi fit into an architecture like that and then gain so much value for your business. And it's so, so useful.